Hello, railway and simulator enthusiasts, and welcome back to this series of guides on how to drive a train in France. Today we are in part 3 of this guide and the beginning of the safety systems, where we will talk about the KVB and the VACMA, and also the Crocodile safety system that repeats signal aspects in cab. So those basic systems are used on all classic lines in France and some in the former French colonies, for instance in Morocco or Algeria. The trackside equipments that they use are the Crocodile and the balise or beacon that I will call in this video. As though the current state of the KVB in France is mostly using the V6 version for the purpose of all the routes that may be in Train Simulator or other train simulations, I will describe both the V5 and V6 KVB aspects in this guide. I will also talk about the VACMA first, very briefly. So let's start with that. The VACMA stands for Veille automatique à contrôle du maintien d'appui. A pretty complicated acronym in French. It would stand for Automatic Vigilance with Maintained Pressure Control. You could also simply call it VA for Veille Automatique, or Automatic Vigilance. It is the name of the French Deadman system, similar to the British DSD, driver safety device, or the German CIFA, if you're familiar with either of those. They use pedals and buttons near the controls or train control wheels, depending on the type of cab that you are using. In all the TGVs and other French trains made between the 60s and the 80s to 90s, those would have a control wheel for the traction and sometimes the rheostatic brake. Those would have a little handle under the wheel to confirm the VACMA, alongside a pedal. You could use either of those. In the TGV, like in the cab in the background, which is a work-in-progress screenshot, you would have a small button near the handle control. You should be able to see that. So how does this work? Well, first, not holding what I will call a pressure point of the VACMA makes it beep like so. If no control or pedal is pressed during that beeping, then the emergency brake procedure will start. That procedure is the opening of the MCB and the automatic application of the emergency brakes. That starts working when the train is exceeding a certain speed, which is around 5 km per hour, as I would recall. While holding the VACMA, if you have held it for 55 seconds, then it will start doing a different ring. At that point, the set pressure point must be released at least once. If you do not this after 2.5 seconds, then the same emergency brake procedure will start. So the same as in other countries' safety system, you need to periodically release the pressure point that you're holding, which might be a pedal or a button. In the background, you should be able to see the pedals that would be used for the VA. In this screenshot, you can also see near the traction and brake controller a small button that would also be used, if held, to control the VA. Then let's start talking about what would be the KVB and the Crocodile. They both use this panel on the left of what would be the TVM and the speedometer. This is what it would look like in more detail. To talk about both systems, the KVB stands for Contrôle de Vitesse par Balise, or Beacon-Based Speed Control. The C in the name has been replaced by a K to not mistake it with command. The Crocodile side of it controls the vigilance of signals. It makes sure that the driver are aware that he is passing what we will call later a closed signal aspect. The KVB also has the power to enforce speed limits, and it also controls braking curves if it has to enforce a deceleration, a lower speed restriction from the previous one. It can also protect the train from passing a signal at danger. Let's first talk about the Crocodile. It is referred to as the Crocodile because of this. It is placed under most signals, at least all of them in the bar type signaling. It detects the train's direction to make sure that the train going in the direction protected by that signal has the protection and not one that is going the opposite direction. This will be loaded with a current to protect signals that show a closed aspect. In real life, the train side equipment is a brush that reads the signal on this Crocodile. Once passing over a Crocodile, the equipment that interests us in the panel with the KVB and Crocodile reader is this on the right hand side. It is a lamp called the LSSF. This means in French lampe de signalisation, signal fermé, or closed signal signaling lamp. As I said before, its role is to control that the driver is aware that they are passing closed signals. In the case of a single green aspect, this will be an open signal. More details on that later. But if you pass an open signal which doesn't require any action from the driver, as in no need to slow down or stop the train, then no action is required on that end. If the driver passes, however, a single yellow, for instance, which would be an avertissement or warning, then this happens. The lamp starts flashing and the sound beeps. At this point, an acknowledgement is required as the driver has passed a closed signal, which in French is signal fermé. What the driver needs to do is to press the acknowledgement button. In the TGV, this looks like this yellow button on the right of the master controller. Once that is done, then the LSSF turns into a fixed aspect. It stops blinking, but the light stays on. So let's talk about the signals that will require an acknowledgement. They are called closed signals. They are a single yellow, which is a warning aspect, its extension being the single flashing yellow, a double horizontal yellow for a 30 speed limit, a slowdown, a warning for a 30 speed limit, the same aspect but flashing for 60 km per hour, a single red being a semaphore, and its extension being the single flashing red. The same for the distant TIVs or speed warning boards. This example is a dynamic one that shows that the driver has to slow down to 60 km per hour. Those square shape are also protected by a crocodile and require acknowledgement. All of those signals are called closed signals. Similarly to the AWS, if you fail to acknowledge a closed signal, then the train will apply the emergency brakes. The emergency brake light is this small white light on the top right of the four lights with the indication that the brakes are being applied on the wheels. This is the emergency brake light. Now say that you have passed a closed signal recently. Now what happens if you pass an open signal? Open signals means permissive signal. Upon passing them, the light will simply switch off. Some old trains might have a ding sound that plays when passing over the associated crocodile. This makes the functioning of the LSSF pretty similar to what would be the AWS in the UK. So let's talk about what are open signals. In French, they are called signal ouvert, signaux ouverts in the plural form. Those are the green light for clear track, a double vertical yellow, which would be the reminder that a speed restriction is about to be enforced, in that case 30 km per hour, the same aspect but flashing for 60 km per hour, and the same distant TIV that we saw earlier, the dynamic one, but this time showing a white band. You might see that some of them are showing a yellowish color, but that is if the light is pretty old. Again, all of the signals were open signals. You might notice that there is a square with SF under it. This one. This is a button, the BPSF, Bouton Poussoir Signal Fermé, which is a pushable button for closed signals. When pressing it, this switches the LSSF off. This is used when first putting the train into service. That lamp will stay on by default. You can press on the button to switch it off when entering service. This was all about the crocodile. Now let's talk about the real scary thing, the KVB. The first part that really interests us is what is on the top left. Let's first talk about that small light with a V on it. This is used alongside the beeping to indicate that the train speed is exceeding the KVB speed by 5 km per hour. In other words, warning, you have to slow down. If you don't, the emergency brakes will be applied. This orange display on the left, I will call it the auxiliary display. The green one is the main display. The way you can consider them to work is that the auxiliary display displays a warning for an upcoming speed restriction. The main display is the control or enforcement of it. To remain constant with the French terms, I will employ control as a word for the enforcement of a speed restriction. The KVB has in total 10 aspects that I will use in this tutorial. One is only used in the V6 version. Another one is used in the V5 and V6 version. The rest is only for the V5, so might not be used in the French railways as of 2020. So, the first aspect, 3 dashes on both displays. This is the active speed control. The line speed is under 160 km per hour, so whatever the line speed is, you shall not exceed 160 km per hour. You might know that some trains can go over 160 km per hour. In this case, a single B will be shown on the main display. This means that the line speed is equal or greater than 160 km per hour. A single P on the auxiliary display indicates a pre-warning for pré-annonce. This is used as an anticipation for a further speed reduction on lines that have a maximum speed higher than 160 km per hour. In other words, slow down to 160 km per hour. Upon passing the next, what would be signal or board, this would go to the main display. So at this point, you should not exceed 160 km per hour. A single L on the auxiliary display now. This is a warning for a temporary speed limit control. The L stands for limitation temporaire de vitesse, temporary speed restriction. The KVB will know what the announced speed limit is, and you need to slow down to that indicated speed restriction. Once that L switches over to the main display, then the temporary speed limit control applies. Do not exceed the indicated speed. Say the speed was announced at 50 km per hour, you shall not exceed 50 km per hour for as long as this L is showing on the main display. Now, 2 zeros in the auxiliary display. A zero might be the indication that you would have to stop. This is almost the case. This is, in fact, a warning for an approach at 30 km per hour. An approach at a red signal. Slow down to 30 km per hour before the signal. Now, if there are 3 zeros, could you take a guess at what the speed would be? 10 km per hour. This is actually also used in the V6. This is the first of the aspects that is used in the KVB V6. All of the aspects that we have talked about so far are only used in the V5. Note that this aspect also is used in the V5, by the way. The last V5 aspect is if the 2 zeros switch over to the main display. This is the speed control at 30 km per hour. Do not exceed that speed. The 3 zero aspects, commanding the driver to slow down to 10 km per hour, doesn't exist in the main display. The last of the aspects that we haven't seen is the only one properly used by the KVB V6. It is an active speed control in real time, also known as KVBP. In this case, the P stands for prolongement, extension in other words. You need to follow the line speed and signals. When approaching a signal in the KVB V5 with the 3 zeros or the 2 zeros showing on the auxiliary display, you would only be able to run at less than respectively 10 or 30 km per hour on the approach to a signal even if it cleared out. The KVBP, or the V6, this aspect in other words, allows the driver to release at a higher speed when the signal clears in front of them. As a reminder, the KVB observes a braking curve when it commands the driver to slow down. Exceeding that braking curve by 5 km per hour makes a warning, a ring, that the driver has to slow down. Exceeding that by 10 km per hour, however, provokes the emergency brake. When the emergency brake is caused by the KVB, then the main display will show FU and the emergency brake lamp will illuminate. The FU stands for freinage d'urgence, which means emergency brake. Next, we need to talk about this set of buttons under the KVB displays. Let's go through them from left to right. The valve button. This means validate or validate. It enters the train settings and activates or reactivates the KVB if it was deactivated. We'll go through the train settings at the end of this video. Next is that purple button. If you've been through part 1 or 2 of this guide series, you would remember that purple in the French signaling is related to shunting. In this specific case, it is the BPMV, bouton poussoir manœuvre, the pushable button for shunting, and it is used for shunting movements when reversing only. So that means that you are sitting in the front cab and the train is going backwards. This toggles off the KVB's control and prevents you from having an emergency brake show you pass a signal that toggles the emergency brake of the KVB. Same as before for the third button. If you've been through the part 1 of this guide series, this aspect should ring a bell to you. And in fact, if you've said that this is the carré or square, then that's right. In this case, it is the BFC, bouton de franchissement de carré, which is a button for passing a square, carré. Being that it is the most restrictive aspect, calling for an absolute stop, this is your only way to cross this type of signal at danger. But note that this must only be done under the permission of the signaler. Finally, the test lamp, BP test, bouton poussoir test, pushable button for a test. This tests all of the KVB lights in order to make sure that they work properly. To terminate with this panel, there are 2 lights that we haven't seen. They are under the panne, which means breakdown, and those are indicateurs de panne, breakdown indicators. When the sol light is lit, sol means ground in French, so it would mean that there is a technical issue with a KVB beacon, trackside equipment in other words. Engin means machine, and this means that there is a technical issue with this panel. And now to finish with the full functioning of the KVB, we need to talk about the fact that some KVB panels have an additional panel under them. We're going to talk about that now. For that, we are going to delete that KVB panel in order to have better visibility over this one. Having talked about the VAR button and how it confirms the KVB settings, this is where you enter those settings, as this is the KVB configuration panel. This is only built in locomotives, as it does not need to be built in passenger EMUs or DMUs, as the configuration remains the same. This would have to be entered in a local-hauled train, as it might pull very different types of stock behind it. So, let's go through them from left to right. This V with numbers in it, 2 of them, is for vitesse, which means speed. It indicates the max train speed. You need to take that number and multiply it by 10 to obtain the train's maximum speed in kilometers per hour. Being that there is a 1/6 in this specific example, you could deduce that this train's max speed is 160 kilometers per hour. Next is this L with a single digit. That's for longueur or length. It indicates the train length. You need to take that number and multiply it by 100 to obtain an approximate length of the train in meters. Then this train's length is about 100 meters. Next to the right is this D with 3 digits. This is for décélération, deceleration. It is in meters per second, or meters per second at the second power. In this case, the deceleration rate is 62 meters per second. So in other words, the speed that you can subtract from your current speed in meters per second for every second of deceleration. Just next to that is actually a speaker. This is what would play the ring sounds of the KVB. Then there is that last knob. This is the mode selector. There are 3 of them, as you can see. Left is VO for voyageur. This would be used if you are pulling a passenger train. The ME is for messager. This would be a light freight. And finally, the MA is marchandise, and it's regular freight, sometimes heavy freight. And this was all about this guy. I hope that this will help you because the KVB can be quite a complicated system for beginners. Don't hesitate to rewatch this video and try to combine it with the other guides to comprehend what the signaling is. In the next video, we will talk about the TVM system. In the meanwhile, thank you very much for watching, have a good one, safe drive.